Hello, everybody. This is Matthew Schutte with Holo. We are here with another AMA. It's been a few months since we've done one of these, and there's been a lot that's gone on since the last one, including us wrapping up our ICO and hiring a bunch of folks, etc. We've had a bunch of hackathons, meetups, etc. And we're going to be here taking questions from you. So really looking forward to this today. We'll be here for an hour, and let's get started. So first, I'm going to start with a few announcements. We've got some meetups. Tonight in Oakland, California, at the Impact Hub from 6 to 8 p.m., we're going to be doing an app design workshop. This is part of our Bay Area meetup. It's going to be in the Lakeside Room. See you there if you're in the Bay Area. Also, tomorrow night, we're going to be doing Intro to Holochain, Distributed Computing, and Eco-Activism. That's Tuesday at Naval in Los Angeles, and that's going to be 7:30 to 9:30 p.m. So for those of you in LA, this is our first meetup in LA. We've sold 70 tickets or 69 tickets. I mean, this thing, there's been a lot of demand, especially for a meetup where we've never actually done one before. So that'll be really fun. Again, that's at Naval, Navel, in Los Angeles. We're going to be doing meetups in New York City this fall. There'll be a whole series of those. Check out holochain.org to stay up to date on that. And in terms of upcoming hackathons, we've got a handful of those as well. Next month, we're going to be doing a hackathon in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. We are still looking for a venue. So if any of you have a recommendation, please contact events, EVENTS, at holo.host. Or, even better, join the Amsterdam channel in Mattermost. That's chat.holochain.org, and propose a venue there. We're also looking for volunteers to help out, especially developers with some experience with Holochain. So if you're interested in going to that event, if you're interested in helping run that event, hit us up either on Mattermost in the Amsterdam channel or at events@holo.host. Also, and that event in Amsterdam, we're planning to do on September 7th through 9th. So October, we're going to be trying to do a hackathon in New York City. That's going to be mid-month. I think that's somewhere in the 10th to the 14th range. I can't remember the exact dates. And that's going to be an NYC hackathon. We're also going to be doing one in Pittsburgh the last week of October at Carnegie Mellon University. You can look for details on both of those coming out on social media. Similarly there, for folks who are interested in attending or who are interested in helping us run that event, whether as a developer or otherwise, please send a message to events@holo.host. If you're interested in having an event in your city, whether it's a meetup, a hackathon, or something else, please contact events@holo.host or Greg on our Holochain chat at chat.holochain.org or .net. Also, you can go ahead and join our Telegram. It's t.me/channel Holo, all one word, CHANNELHOLO. For those of you that are like me, who feel like Telegram is a completely overwhelming medium with far too many messages coming far too fast, our online chat community at chat.holochain.org is a little bit better because it allows people to talk in channels that are about what they're interested in talking about, that are more narrow, smaller communities, healthier communities. All right, my team is lining up some questions for us that are being shared in the chat, and there's a whole bunch of messages getting written. and we'll start diving in. Let's see. First question, max supply of the Holo fuel. This is from Shiguang Li. Question, but the max supply of Holo fuel, so again, this is not Holo tokens, this is Holo fuel, which isn't out in the world yet because we haven't launched Holo yet. But Holo fuel is a mutual credit currency. And so the supply is always zero, actually. It's kind of strange. But anytime one person's account, another person's account goes up. So the total balance is technically zero. But what's actually happening there is the credit limits are being controlled, not the supply. It's not a token-based system. It's a mutual credit system. If you want more details on be at holochain.org/currency white paper. I think that's right. Or no, holo.host. If somebody on the team can grab that link for me, that would be great, because it's been a while since I've actually typed that in. Currency paper, that might be the one. I'll come back to that in just a second. So we've got a question from Gamma Go. How did it work? Whew, that's a long one. More details in lay terms. How does Holo fuel supply work in terms of expanding/contracting? Examples would be really helpful. All right. Holo fuel is a mutual credit cryptocurrency. What that basically means is, if, let's say, well, I'll talk first about what's happened with the ICO. So people have purchased Holo tokens in our ICO. They gave us Ethereum, we gave them Holo tokens. Later on, those Holo tokens are going to be redeemable for Holo fuel. But what's happened is they've given us something, right? And what happens in Holo fuel is we're going to make that visible. The way we're going to make it visible is not only are we going to give them an account balance, we're actually going to give us a negative account balance. So the Holo organization's account is going to be negative. If somebody bought 100 units of Holo fuel, which is actually a pretty small amount, but if somebody bought 100 units of Holo fuel, we're going to credit them with 100 units, and we're going to go negative 100 units. So it's reflected on both sides. Okay? That makes visible how much value we've taken in through other means, right? So we took in Ether, we're giving out Holo fuel, we're reflecting that on, not only in positive account balances for them, but negative account balances for us. The place where people start to get confused, and where we're doing things that are not super familiar patterns for most folks, has to do with the possibility of other people, aside from the Holo organization, being able to issue Holo fuel. And at one level, what's happening there is someone who's hosting, who's providing computing services to others in the community, is going to build up some reputation over time. Over the, let's say, the first few months, they establish that they are regularly hosting, this much content. They're providing this much storage and compute. They are going to be able, they're going to gain the capacity to issue currency. That sounds scary, but basically what they're doing is they're issuing IOUs. They're pre-selling their own hosting. If we have a market rate, and there's some of the comments are predictions of how much Holo fuel will be worth, right? Which, fun game to play, not all that fruitful at this point. It's basically just speculation. But let's take just a simple number, because it'll be easier. $1 per Holo fuel. Let's not make this in dollars. 1 megabyte of storage per Holo fuel, something along those lines. If we have this 1 megabyte of storage, per holo fuel. Somebody may come along and go, you know what? I'm willing to offer 1.2 megabytes of storage for one holo fuel. They've essentially just underbid. They've made it so that they're offering to give you the equivalent of 1 megabyte at a lower rate. Well, that's essentially what's going to happen with these folks who are issuing new currency. At least that's my belief. They're not normally going to offer that currency at a higher rate than the market rate. They're going to pre-sell their IOU, right? They're pre-sell their hosting by offering it at a slight discount to the existing market rate. And other members of the community are going to go, I believe that they're going to deliver on that. Yeah, I think they are. I'm willing to take that discount. And they'll pay for that then. Now, what's happening here has to do with, do other people find you credible? Is the reputation that you've established credible? If they don't find you credible, or they find your price too high for the amount of credibility that you've established, they're not going to purchase your holo that you're seeking to issue. So that's a little bit of how this expands and contracts. So if there's the way that it will expand is more of these folks go, yep, the price seems high right now, so I will underbid that and pre-sell some hosting. But if the price gets low, people are going to go, well, shoot, I'll deliver hosting at this low rate. I don't really necessarily want to be pre-selling at this low rate. So that's a short version of that. Unfortunately, holo fuel is complicated enough that it could take up the entire hour, and we don't have a whole hour for holo fuel alone. But hopefully that got you some insight. When will the organization start the process of working with appropriate regulators so hosts can one day cash out in their national currency? I don't know. We're working with regulators now in certain jurisdictions. So I guess the process has already started. But I don't know when. We will make an announcement when we get to someplace on that. That has to do with direct cashing out of holo into their national currency, not having to go through some other cryptocurrency. Now, today, holo tokens can be cashed out by going into Ethereum or Bitcoin and then using an exchange that works with fiat. But we are working towards having holo fuel served by exchanges. Holo fuel's not even out in the world yet, but we're aiming to have holo fuel also supported by exchanges. And so even if we don't have holo fuel to dollars type redemption directly through the organization, like even prior to that, we should be able to see holo fuel to crypto to fiat. The key thing for us there is we're wanting people's contributions to get recognized. We're looking for recognition of contribution, and redemption into other currencies enables recognition more broadly, right? It enables somebody who wasn't necessarily a part of this little holo ecosystem to nonetheless recognize the contribution that you made inside of this community. Why? Because you had cashed out to something else and you were able to pay for groceries or for rent or something in a currency that they accept. So that's a lot of what drives us there. In terms of predictions of when that's going to happen, I'm not going to make those right now. I don't think it would be legal to try to make a prediction. But once those things start to happen, we will certainly make announcements. How useful for the holochain ecosystem do you consider a decentralized exchange built on holochain? How useful will that be? Yeah, I think that's going to be pretty useful. I think decentralized exchanges built on holochain will be useful. We will work on some of our own stuff around that. Possibly. I already know there are some other folks interested in working on that as well. But how useful is kind of a difficult question to answer. Useful. I'll say, hey, I think that would be useful. Somebody says, I am awesome. Matt, you are awesome. Thank you. Great, great examples, and thanks for the details. Helpful for everyone, even if people have read all the articles. Yeah, this stuff is complicated. It's definitely complicated, and most of us don't actually understand what we read. Like, this is just true generally. I used to teach the LSAT, the test to get into law school, and so I was teaching people who had gone to college, and many of them had gone to top colleges. They were about to finish college, or they had just finished college, and even those people don't understand specifically what they're reading. Like, they don't understand the nuances. We tend to read quickly and without tone and without pausing, and we don't go back and reread, and we don't craft visuals in our head as we're reading because it just takes a long time. I'm unusual in that that's how I read, which means I read really slowly. Like, if I'm reading alongside somebody, they get to the end of the page and they're tapping their fingers, and I'm still like halfway through. So yeah, reading is brutal, and there's just examples help. We are hoping to get more things out there in the coming months that have not just nice talk stuff, but videos with animation and things like that. A friend wrote his favorite Mac quotes. So yeah, reading is brutal. All right, Brian says, can you comment at all on if and or how much was paid for the Binance listing / partnership? I know in the past you guys said you were anti-paying for listing or conference or speaking at conferences. We aren't able to comment on that, unfortunately. We're not opposed to paying for services. We are opposed to paying for publicity that is presented as if it is a merit-based thing. Like that feels kind of immoral to us. And in the crypto world, it's totally messed up. Many publications basically won't write articles unless you pay them. Many conferences charge their attendees, but then they also charge their speakers. That makes it so they have a conflict of interest. If you're really wanting to put together something good for attendees, you should find material that's interesting and fruitful and going to be useful for those attendees. If you're instead filtering about who gets to present on the basis of who's willing to pay, it's not that you can't get good content, but you've started to have a conflict of interest there, at least in our opinion. So we've generally avoided that. Rufia75 says, what are the most exciting new things you guys are doing? Building, to be totally honest. Building Holochain. You can follow along in the GitHub repo. We're also building some dog fooding apps. We're building Holo. We're pretty busy building. We haven't been speaking very publicly recently because we've been kind of heads down building. We'll do more of that over the coming months. We've been doing meetups and hackathons and things like that, but we haven't been doing a lot of, aside from occasional interviews, we haven't been doing a lot of promotion. And in part that's because, at least for me, the promotion stuff is great for bringing attention. And attention is only useful if you have some way of using it. And right now, we don't have a way of using that attention. It would really not be so much attention as distraction. So more attention equals us being in lots of conversations, which equals us not actually spending our time building. So right now, we're mostly focused on building. And we're making lots of progress on that front. We are also doing some behind the scenes work on improving our communications and marketing. That's still work in progress. We've been doing a lot of work on our developer documentation and developer training. So if you are a developer, or if you're interested in developing, even if you're not yet a developer, go to developer.holochain.org. That's our documentation site. It's getting better and better by the day. We're going to have online courses and things coming out in the near future as well. And this stuff is getting easy enough to build that even somebody like me can do it. I'm not really a developer. I am a bit of an architect, but my time spent at keyboard in front of an IDE is minimal. And even I can start to build these apps using JavaScript and the scaffolding engine and the sort of paint by numbers stuff that we're starting to make available to people through developer.holochain.org. So yeah, that's my my answer to Rufio's questions. Another question from Rufio. Are the first Holoport users, first batch, let's say, going to be working out bugs since it's new hardware? Or do you feel that there is not going to be any bugs? Nope, there will be bugs. Yeah, our first batch is very explicitly going to be alpha testing. Hey, we're working on this stuff. It's not prime time yet. We're aiming to have that go out in the fourth quarter of this year. So we're aiming to have Holo up and running and Holoports shipped before the end of the year. That said, that version of Holo will almost certainly be an alpha version. And we're not estimating that we'll get to something that is more stable and generally public friendly until next spring, until first or second quarter of next year. That will be a beta version. And just for those who aren't familiar with this stuff, beta means, in our world, at least our interpretation of beta, means that the software is stable enough, decent enough that it is usable by the public, but it's not version 1 software yet. Just to be clear, Gmail was in beta for years, had millions of users and was still considered in beta. So beta can last a long time, but we're not thinking that we will start getting to beta until sometime early next year. What else? And if I were to promise that we would ship something without any bugs, then you should you should not trust me, because that doesn't sound like a promise that anybody can deliver on. Okay, what else? Java 4 beginner says, as you are building this ecosystem, how confident are you that Holo will achieve? What are the bottlenecks so far? This is one of those questions that's sort of like you can't really answer. I can't go, oh, 4. I'm a 4 confident. That's we're pretty confident. We think that we've got the right approach. We think we've been building the right team. That said, I'll answer one of the other questions. What are the bottlenecks so far? One thing that we would love to see help from others in the ecosystem on is, and this is a deeply technical thing. It's not just impacting Holo, but Holo Fuel and pretty much all of the other projects in the decentralized web, the projects that are actually trying to do peer-to-peer stuff. At the peer-to-peer networking layer, NAT traversal and punching through firewalls tends to be problematic. And this is a sticky problem. A bunch of projects are having issues with it. It's not that it doesn't work at all. It's just that it doesn't work consistently, or as consistently as we would all like. People have been using WebRTC. People have been using libp2p, which is a library that the IPFS community came up with. Yeah, so this problem of I'm wanting to send messages to somebody else and then receive them gets complicated in part because my router has an IP address and then talks back to a number of different other things, and so it makes it easy. It makes some things easy and it makes other things really hard. And this is a complicated problem that you talk to application developers and they're like, man, the browsers need to support this stuff. And then you talk to the browser folks at Chrome or Firefox and they're going, man, the hardware companies who are building the routers and switches, they need to fix this stuff. And so I don't know who needs to fix it. I don't know where the answer lies completely. Some of the doings of nodes who present a static IP. These are peers in the community that are also presenting a static IP address, and that can help solve the problem. That is not. I don't know if there are other solutions that we can make use of that I'm not aware of there. And this is like right at the edge of my pay grade in terms of what I'm familiar with on the technology front. But that's a thing that we could probably use guidance on. I'm actually going to take a question from from that I'm seeing in the chat that didn't get shared in, and it's just a fun one. Is Eric Harris Brown Steve Wozniak? In our community, I'll say yeah, kind of. I'll say Eric is sort of the Steve Wozniak of our project. That's pretty funny. Eric, I think, is helping out on this AMA a little bit on the back end. So Eric, if you have any thoughts on that one, that'd be great to hear from you directly. How do you think, or do you think the beta testing of holoports will slow down the economy or interrupt it significantly, or has potential to? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that means. You've got to test stuff. The economy is really about fostering a flow of activity. And so Paul was just writing something, but go ahead and write it up, Paul. I'll read whatever you write. The economy is really about fostering some flow of activity. And so you have to have working stuff to foster that flow. The actual economy is the flow of web hosting getting paid for. The price of the currency is not the economy. That's just a result of the economy. The economy itself is actually a flow of activity. Getting well-functioning components so that you actually have a well-functioning ecosystem where there's a bunch of activity happening, that's what actual wealth is. The price of the currency is just related to that. It's just something that's driven by that. So no, getting working stuff isn't going to slow down the economy. It's kind of required. And the process of getting things working is how you get to things working. Victor says, does Holo have any plans to allow the software to be installed in servers outside of Holoports? Looking for a cloud compute opportunity. So yes, 100%. You don't need to buy a Holoport in order to run Holo. Now, initially, we may ship Holo on Holoports slightly before making Holo available to others. I'm not sure on the exact timing of that. But the gist is, initially, we will make Holo available on Holoports either at that time or shortly after. We will make Holo available for Linux, in part because we're running the Holoports on Linux. So we're going to be building a Linux-based version of Holo. Soon after that, we're planning to try to support Mac and Windows, etc. But right away, or at least soon after, we will have Holo available on non-Holo port machines, because our goal here is actually to make use of the spare computing capacity on people's existing devices, on their existing laptops, on their existing desktops, etc. Making use of that spare capacity is the goal. Holo ports were really just a way of us making sure that we had some really high quality devices on the network 24 hours a day, right from the get-go. It was a way for us to make sure that this stuff worked from a user perspective. I type in a website and something comes back right away and consistently. So for us, this was a bootstrapping method, Holo ports, not the only way of participating in the system. All right, at LK and at Patty Baker and at Dan and at Samurajich Yuri say, any details on the Mozilla partnership? Not yet. I will say we've chatted with some of the folks at Mozilla. They've got a handful of different teams working on some interesting things. One group in particular has been doing a bunch of stuff around trying to support the decentralized web. Mozilla is committed to supporting the decentralized web, and it's early days still, it's experimental still, but they're working on it. Just this week, I was at the Decentralized Web Summit here in San Francisco, which was awesome. For those of you who didn't get to go, it kind of had all of the folks, or almost all of the folks, lots of the pioneers of the original internet, including folks like Tim Berners-Lee, who created the World Wide Web, and Vint Cerf, who invented TCP/IP, the protocol that most internet traffic gets routed on, as well as some of the young guns like Juan Baptiste Benet from IPFS. It was a blast. It was good to see a lot of old friends, and to see them all in the same place was great. I got to have some good conversations with some people from Mozilla at that event, some folks that I hadn't talked to at Mozilla, and so we're gonna keep moving that forward. I think until stuff is shipping, it's not shipped. So that's forward to building with even more, alongside even more people at Mozilla. Someone just commented, Holo is porting to Rust. Very interesting. Yeah, interesting for us too. We are planning to continue supporting the Go implementation, but we are working on a Rust implementation for Holochain. We're getting that mature. We're maturing that little by little. In part, we're building in Rust to support being able to use WebAssembly and to be able to support people being able to access Holochain apps from just their browser. So them being able to kind of decouple portions of Holochain. So some of the front end stuff and back end stuff in terms of someone taking an action, that kind of front end, not necessarily the visual stuff, but hey, I'm tweeting, that kind of thing. They may be able to do from a browser without having to support a distributed hash table on the back end. This can actually allow us to do a more diverse set of patterns for how to participate in peer-to-peer communities, to have peer-to-peer, fully peer-to-peer, where everybody is a full node, peer-to-peer to visitor, where you've got people participating in the community, and then outsiders who are wanting to interact but aren't wanting to actually be peers or aren't allowed to be peers, depending on the relationships there, and then hybrids between those as well. So, and we think it's important because contexts vary. So we think it's important to support a variety of different use cases. Holo obviously plays a big role in serving to outside visitors in the Holochain ecosystem, but we're also planning to support some other ways of interacting and relating as well. Samuel Lancaster says, hi, Matt, do you have an estimate of the capacity of the future network based on the number of sold Holo ports, internet speeds in the countries they are being shipped to, etc.? That's an interesting question. I will say that even if we did that analysis, it wouldn't give us a good answer, because the capacity of the future network is not based on the Holo ports alone. It's based on anybody who downloads Holo and runs it. So that can go viral pretty quickly, or at least it has the capacity to. And that won't be limited to the countries in which we are listing, or not listing, but selling things. I'm like reading two things at once, so sometimes I'm garbling words. Apologies. Do you think Holo is overhyped or underrated at this time? And I'm totally biased. Of course, I think it's underrated. I think that we are very under the radar still. We're just not widely known yet. And so my perception is that it's not until people start actually using holochain apps, how powerful they are, that the rest of the world will go, oh, wow, this is a thing. So there you go. Somebody had written here, and I'll just take this. Do you mean, sir, holochain work as a browser? Now, I don't know if they were asking me that, but Dinesh, no, I'm not meaning that holochain will work as a browser. I'm meaning that holochain apps can start to work in browsers, or at least partly in browsers. That's part of what we're trying to aim for with Rust. Another thing with the Rust build is that because it supports WebAssembly, there's a bunch of languages that you can write in that will compile to WebAssembly. And so that enables people to build apps in a bunch of other languages. Sam says, no, that's already answered. And that's already answered. Halidic asked, who invented Holochain? Holochain comes out of the Metacurrency project. It's a part of a larger project called Scepter. For those of you who are really geeky, you can go and dive into Scepter at Scepter, CEPTR.org, to Metacurrency. But Holochain primarily comes from Arthur Brock and Eric Harris Brown, the founders of the Metacurrency project. There are a number of us who had worked on the Metacurrency project for years, and people who had volunteered and had sort of gabbed or hung out for 10 days at a retreat and thought through a bunch of stuff. Many of those different efforts contributed to mapping out the vision of Scepter. And Holochain is a part of Scepter. But if I'm going to distill it down and not give credit to all of the various humans who deserve credit for shaping what Holochain is, I'd say Eric and Arthur are the ones who invented Holochain. At the same time, Holochain's getting invented on an ongoing basis by all of our core developers, people in our communities, right? Nicholas Luck is one of our core developers on Holochain, and he's done a whole bunch of stuff to make it different than it was in its original envisioned form. And so like anything, this is an ecosystem and a community that is evolving and growing and changing over time. Los Pirata says, does Holochain have many partnerships? We do have some partnerships. We've announced some of them. Others are in works and not yet announced. But a couple include a partnership with Just One Organics, which is a company doing food production using vegetables that are kind of scratch and dent vegetables, stuff that's not going to go to a grocery store. They take that and dehydrate it, and they smash it into a puree and then dehydrate that, and they actually make this dried form of food that has incredible flavor and lots of nutrients. And they're using Holochain for a variety of reasons. But we're working with them, as well as another group called Producers Market, to try to create peer-to-peer systems of food production, to try to really foster some more vibrant flows in terms of food production in ways that are kind of similar to what we're trying to do with web hosting in Holo. There's other partnerships like our partnership with Promether in terms of security. We're doing security research with Promether. That's specifically related to the question that I brought up earlier around NAT traversal and firewalls, trying to really make peer-to-peer work. So we're working with them on that. There are others as well, but I'll leave it there for now. Kay Davidson says, Matt, with all your Holo/Holochain commitments, do you still find time to catch some waves/surf? For the first half of this year, no. I got no waves between the middle of January and the end of May, unfortunately, and that made it so that I was a very lopsided human. I was very out of shape. I wasn't feeling healthy. The explanatory stuff got good because I was running around Europe. I did a 33-city, 99-day tour of Europe, and then I went and did more talking in the US on the East Coast and West Coast. And so I've gotten better at explaining this stuff because of all of those iterations. But my health was not in the greatest shape. And so I actually drove across the country to Austin, Texas from San Francisco. And did some events there. We did a hackathon there, and I did a little more work there. And then I drove to southern Mexico. And so when I haven't been having to travel to speak, I've been living in southern Mexico the last couple of months and getting to surf there. So when I'm there, I'm surfing every morning, and then I work for like 12 hours each day. But I'm still getting to surf every day. And so I've gotten a lot healthier physically over the last little bit. So thanks for the question. I'm on the road at present. I had to do a talk in London last week and a talk this week at the Decentralized Web Summit, and I'll be in Vegas for DEF CON next week. And then I get to go back and surf a little bit more before going back to Europe in the beginning of September. So yeah, it varies. Somebody said, Holo get pumped so hard today. Do you know why? No idea. I have no idea why these things move around. I wish I did. I didn't even know that we had gone up significantly because I haven't checked, since dawn. But and I don't, to be totally honest, I don't follow Holo that much. I follow the Holo tokens pricing all that often because it's largely being driven by things that have nothing to do with us, have nothing that we have control over. We're kind of keeping our heads down and building, and that's just being driven by speculation for the most part. How can you position and compare Holochain with permissioned blockchains like Hyperledger? Holochain is a little bit different from a permission blockchain. So Holochain apps can use discretion about who it is that they are sharing information with and allowing to participate in their community. So the users might decide, for instance, that only people who are on this list or have this token can participate, and then they hand out those tokens to 5 people. You might do that for something like a Slack team or something. And so you could think of it like a permissioned space. So it's got a permissioned space, but it's not a blockchain, right? It could also be a permissionless space where anybody can join. Anybody who wants to run the code can join. But it's also not a blockchain because we're not doing global consensus. We're not using blocks. We have each participant holding on to their own history. Tamper-resistant log, but they're not trying to reconcile the order of events that I saw and the order of events you participated in. I think of this as the way that Holochain apps work as being closer to how it works at a global scale. With email, I pay attention to, did I get this message before that message? But we as a community don't feel like we need to reconcile, did Matt get this message before Jim got some completely unrelated message? Like, we don't feel like we need to come into agreement about which of those happened first. Not important, not worth the effort. And so email is a good example of a distributed system. Whereas blockchain individual blockchains are decentralized, not distributed. And I think of them as actually a centralizing technology, because the thing that they are centralizing is perspective. Now, it's true that there is no one party in the middle dictating, but there is a single perspective in the middle that they end up creating. And that actually addresses the main concern that the blockchain folks were focused on, which is corruption. But it doesn't address the main concern that we were focused on, which is complexity, which is how does your community handle and manage complexity? Centralizing perspective is a horrible way to build adaptive capacity or the ability to manage complexity. So we think that what we're up to much more closely mimics how natural living systems organize themselves. And we think that natural living systems organize themselves that way because it works, because it's the only pattern that they've found that to persist. That essentially that pattern works, and so it persists. So we're working from a pretty different frame. We've got about 15 minutes left. I'm going to ask my team to try to prioritize some of these, because we've got a whole bunch and we're not going to get to them all. I'm going to start with this next question from Adrian. Nice. But would love to see the other ones get ordered a little bit. So Holochain can run on all the miners that will be redundant in the future. Well, maybe. Many of those miners, the ones that are ASICs, are specialized to do just one thing. And so though they're really good at that just one thing, they're not generalized computers. And so they may not be useful for other stuff. But the folks who are running mining on GPUs, yep, those will be useful for supporting Holochain apps. I actually had a conversation with somebody in January at the World Economic Forum who runs one of the largest mining operations in the world. And I basically said this. I said, hey, if we're right, if what we're up to actually does end up being the future path, you would be well served to invest in GPU-based mining, not ASIC-based mining. And he was like, we diversify. He wasn't all that interested in listening or chatting about that stuff. So that's fine. But yeah, that's my take on it. GPUs more likely to maintain their utility, regardless of whether we're the thing that gets worked on or that gets built on in the future or something else. Building an ASIC is like you're optimizing for one very narrow thing and you have no adaptive capacity, which may be fine. That might work with their business model. It's incredibly wasteful. It's very much part of we're going to throw things out quickly, but yeah. All right. And to be totally honest, I don't have a whole lot to say about the business models of mining operations. I think we're moving towards a post-mining world. That's what we're doing. Holo's architecture, its ecosystem is not a mining-based ecosystem. It's a useful work-based ecosystem, i.e., in other words, it's supporting people only when they're doing work that others find useful, which is different from mining, which is basically wasting a ton of electricity on trying to win a lottery. Miko Vilena asks, what's your biggest why in building Holo and Holochain? So this one is pretty deep for me. And I think for a lot of the other people on the team, we think that the patterns of organization that humans are making use of today, things like representative democracy or corporations or the stock market or banking, that those patterns of coordination aren't up to the challenges that we face. Right? The challenges that we face today are of a world that's changing really rapidly. It's of incredible complexity, and that the organizing patterns that we make use of now are failing. They're not capable of handling the complexity that we're facing. And so we actually need different ways of coordinating if we're going to actually succeed in addressing those challenges. What's at stake there is the extinction of the human species and probably a billion other species, right? So that's what we lose. Does nature go away? No. Will the planet survive? Almost certainly, right? But humanity might not survive. And we may end up losing billions of years of wisdom, essentially, that has been gained through tons of trial and error by the living world. And that wisdom is actually embodied wisdom. It takes the form of organisms in ecosystems as these dynamic, self-regenerating or regenerative systems. We would like to not lose that. We would like humans to not go away, and we would like lots of these other species to not go away. We think that's a desirable outcome. The end goal here is to start to kickstart and build the technical foundation or some of the technical infrastructure on which new, more vibrant forms of coordination can operate. And we think that nature gives us the pattern. Nature has the cheat sheet. We're trying to make it so that human social coordination can happen in ways that are similar to the patterns of biological coordination that we see in natural living systems. And our thesis is that those patterns work. Those patterns are the only way on an ongoing basis to be able to manage complexity well. So that's what we're up to. Holo chain is a step in that direction. Holo is an important bridge to the old world, the existing world, the centralized world, to help accelerate the transition to this new pattern. And to be totally honest, Holo chain is just one step. It's a first step. But we see other steps showing up soon after that. Certain of them we're planning to build ourselves, like the other parts of Scepter. But we're certain lots of other people are going to build them as well, build things on top of that as well. And that includes not just the technical stuff, but the human social patterns. We foresee an explosion in patterns of social coordination that mimics the Cambrian explosion after the innovation of DNA. After DNA showed up on the scene, we had all kinds of life forms emerge. We think that we're going to see that process as well with social coordination. There'll be new forms of social organization or social organisms, and there'll be lots of them. And not all of them will work. Not all of them will work in every context. In fact, none of them will work in every context, because a social organism operates inside of some larger context, and it has a relationship with that. It ends up changing that context as well. And so there's this very dynamic system that already happens in the natural world, that happens at small human social scale, but we've never had a medium of communication that can support those patterns at larger scales. And that's what we're aiming to do. So thanks for asking the question, Miko. Adrian asks, how will Holochain and Scepter change the world? And which sectors will it have an impact on? So I kind of just went into this a little bit, but to dive in a touch further, we think that Holochain and Scepter will support a world of mutual sovereignty, meaning that parties are entering into ways of interacting with one another that work for them. And if it doesn't work for them, they will stop doing that dance. If they continue to do a dance that doesn't work for them, eventually they're going to go away. I mean, that's how it works in the natural world, right? So in one way or another, and if they go away, they can't keep doing that dance. So in one way or another, dances that don't work stop getting done. This opt-in nature and this iterative process is how emergence functions. what are the sectors that new pattern might have an impact on? I can't think of any sectors that it would, right? Today we think of money and banking and government and voting and infrastructure and the arts. And I think if you change things at this layer, at the medium of communication layer, if you create a new medium of communication, everything else changes. That is certainly what happened after the creation of DNA. After that showed up on the scene, everything changed in some pretty significant ways. It's also, to a lesser extent, what happened after the rise of writing showing up on the scene. When that new medium of communication showed up, the ways in which humans coordinated with one another shifted dramatically. We started living in much bigger groups. We started being able to do more complex forms of human organization. Many of them were centralized. They were hierarchical forms of human coordination. And that in part has to do with how writing works. It's interesting to think of it that way. But our existing patterns of governance and coordination, our markets, etc., are all to some extent based on the features that written communication lead to. The ways in which written communication works and the limits of written communication. I know that's a little weird and abstract, but try to imagine running a corporation with 100,000 people in it, or a government without having writing. It doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. So the medium of communication ends up influencing and shaping the patterns of coordination. But we're trying to enable some really interesting new patterns of coordination. And our goal with Holochain Scepter is to build the mediums of communication that can support that. Java for Beginner says, would big players like AWS with their big infrastructure run Holo on them, again, decentralized like BTC, or still normal person with normal machine having ideal computing power earn decent return? So we've tried to, the main question here is, hey, if big players jump in, is it just going to become centralized again? We've tried to architect Holo and the currency design and the hosting design so that even if big players like Amazon decided to shift all of their computing power towards supporting Holochain apps, it wouldn't re-centralize. They would be able to offer services. They wouldn't gain huge advantages over others because of their infrastructure. That's not to say they wouldn't have any advantages, but they wouldn't gain huge advantages. And we've tried to make it so that even if they end up occupying a particular niche, maybe that niche is like really high-end AI, lots of nodes, closely co-located, type stuff. Other forms of work that are less dependent on co-location of physical resources there's still an economy and support for recognition of those forms of contribution. So I'll leave that at that. Ross Hartkin says, can you explain how much the supply of credits is going to fluctuate? I don't think we can make a prediction on that. There is a little bit of stuff earlier in this recording or in this live stream that you can go back and where we talk a little bit about how the fluctuation occurs, but how is the supply going to fluctuate is going to depend on the behavior of the ecosystem. Like how many apps are there? How are those apps being used? How many hosts are there? How are those hosts showing up? That's going to be a dynamic thing, and it will change over time. We've got 1 minute left. I will answer one last question. Based on the research this is Michael Stack. Based on the research work going on with libp2p related to Ethereum scalability, specifically sharding, DHTs, reducing network overhead, etc., has Holo incorporated any of the lessons learned? In the sense, as these topics move forward, has Holo's team had an aha moment in regards to solving these issues, giving the scalability Holo seeks? So, Michael, my belief is that the people in the blockchain world if they actually want to solve their scalability problems, are going to be driven towards patterns similar to Holochain, if not Holochain itself, right? Because they work. Now, we're making use of a particular configuration, distributed hash tables that are validating distributed hash tables with tamper-resistant logs that are local tamper-resistant logs, and a shared set of rules. Like, that's our particular configuration that we're making use of. There may be other tools that people could come up with, could make a slightly different configuration, but the philosophical frame from which we're approaching this, I think, is the one that everybody else is going to get driven towards. So yes, yay, other people are starting to realize that centralizing perspective has costs that are so high, it makes it non-feasible to actually do anything useful. And it undermines the composability and adaptability of a system. And so that will drive them, I believe, back towards where we're at. So the long story short is, yes, there are big lessons that we've learned, not from the blockchain folks. There's big lessons that we've learned from our over a decade worth of work thinking about this stuff, from people in the cybernetics world, folks like Gregory Bateson, from people who've been thinking about how complex adaptive systems function for a very long time. Now, there's a half-written white paper on the metacurrency.org site called Grammatic Capacities and Evolution in Complex Adaptive Systems. And that white paper, though it's half-written, starts to point out what we're talking about here. What kinds of, how these patterns actually work in general, in any complex adaptive system. That's one place you can turn. A few other places where you may get a fairly decent summary are some of my recent talks. I had one that was fairly short in Austin at the Holochain Hackathon. It's like 23 minutes long. You can check that out. I'll add that to the chat here when we wrap up in just a minute. There was one that I did that's longer, that goes into a bit more detail at Node in San Francisco. I believe that talk is on Facebook. And then I just did a talk a few days ago at the Decentralized Web Summit. That's about a half-hour talk. That's decent as well. And there's one that's I don't think is online yet, but that was from London at open.coop last week. And that was about not just the tech side, but the future of work and how we can actually start to do new forms of organization or coordination that don't have an organization in the middle. Not just a decentralized autonomous organization, no organization. These things end up working like an ecosystem. Okay, I've got a couple of things here before we run. Thank you, everybody, for all the questions. A handful of reminders. Go to Mattermost. If you're interested in talking about this stuff at a deeper level, especially the, hey, how do we build things, or how should I think about this stuff? Go to Mattermost. It's at chat.holochain.org or chat.holochain.net. Join it. It's free. Join some channels. Find the channels that are exciting for you, okay? There's channels on biomimicry and governance and building certain kinds of applications, and go and gab. I'll also do another reminder here at the end. For those of you who are more developer-oriented, in addition to joining the chat, you should go check out our developer documentation site at developer.holochain.org. And then finally, I'm just going to make some reminders about the upcoming events. We've got a meetup tonight in Oakland at Impact Hub Oakland from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. It's our app design workshop. Come on out. If you're in the Bay Area, come meet other folks, share the projects that you've been thinking about working on, hear from other people about projects they've been thinking about working on. Let's start building community and building applications together. That's tonight. Tomorrow night in Los Angeles, Intro to Holochain, Distributed Computing and Eco-Activism. That's going to be at Naval from 7:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. We're also going to have some meetups this fall in New York City for those of you in the Big Apple. And in September 7th through 9th, we're looking to do a hackathon in Amsterdam. We are still looking for a venue. If you know of someplace that we should be hosting this, please message us via email at events@holo.host or through the Amsterdam channel in Mattermost. Last couple of points. In October, we're going to be doing hackathons in New York City in the middle of the month and Pittsburgh in the last week at CMU. That's the last week of October. Look for details coming out on all of that stuff in our social media. If you are interested in having an event in your city, please contact our events team at events@holo.host or message Greg Schaefer at Greg, Greg, on our HoloChain chat, chat.holochain.net. Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. Until next time, go build, make the world a better place. Fun doing it. To meet many of you in person at these upcoming events. I'm going to be spending a fair bit of time in Europe this fall. So for those of you who are in Europe, stop, say hi, or else I'll see you online. Thank you. Bye.